On July 21, 1961, Gus Grissom's spacecraft blew its hatch on its own, in open ocean, moments after a flawless splashdown, and the machine that could have proven what really happened sat under nearly 3 miles of Atlantic water for the next 38 years. Liberty Bell 7 was only the second American spacecraft to carry a person into space. Its flight itself went by the book. What happened in the water afterward followed Gus Grissom for the rest of his career and outlived him by decades. Project Mercury was NASA's first attempt to put a human being into space, running in direct answer to the Soviet Union's early lead. Alan Shepard had already made America's first suborbital flight 10 weeks earlier in Freedom 7. Grissom was chosen to fly next, with John Glenn serving as his backup. His capsule carried one significant upgrade over Shepard's, a hatch that could be blown open in an emergency using a ring of explosive charge, triggered by a plunger the astronaut had to arm and then strike. It was meant to give a trapped pilot a fast way out. Nobody expected it to matter this much, this soon. Grissom's flight went up on a Redstone rocket from Cape Canaveral, a suborbital hop lasting roughly 15.5 minutes. He experienced weightlessness, endured heavy G-forces coming back down, and rode his parachute into the Atlantic in good order. The mission, by every technical measure that counted, was a success. He had become the second American to reach space. He radioed the recovery forces, ran through his post-landing checklist, and waited, bobbing in his capsule, for the helicopter. That's when the flight stopped being routine. A Marine helicopter from the carrier USS Randolph moved in to make the pickup. The plan called for the crew to hook onto the capsule and lift it slightly out of the water, at which point Grissom would blow the hatch himself, climb out, and be pulled up in a rescue sling. Before that could happen, a crewman leaned out to snip off the capsule's long recovery antenna. And below him, without warning, the hatch fired. 70 explosive bolts went off almost simultaneously. Seawater began pouring through the open hatch immediately. Grissom, still partly suited and sitting in what was now a flooding metal shell, scrambled out into the ocean. His suit had a design that was meant to keep him afloat, but water was getting in through an open oxygen inlet he had left uncovered for the flight, and he started taking on water himself. He was, by his own later account and by witnesses, close to drowning. The helicopter crew tried to save the spacecraft rather than just the man. They hooked onto Liberty Bell 7 and attempted to lift it clear of the water, but a capsule full of seawater weighs far more than an empty one, and the aircraft's engine began to overheat under the load. The crew made the call that every recovery team dreads. They released the capsule to save the helicopter. Grissom was pulled from the water by a second helicopter, exhausted and shaken. Liberty Bell 7 sank beneath him, dropping toward the ocean floor nearly 3 miles down, deeper than the wreck of the Titanic. Grissom had survived. His spacecraft was gone, and gone with it was any hardware evidence of what had actually triggered the hatch. In the debriefing that followed, Grissom insisted he hadn't touched the plunger. He said the hatch simply blew on its own, that he'd been lying there doing nothing when it happened. Investigators at the time couldn't rule this out, but they couldn't fully confirm it either, since the one piece of physical evidence that might have settled the question was sitting on the seafloor. There had been exactly one test firing of this exact hatch mechanism before the flight, conducted about 10 days earlier with Grissom present to observe it. It worked as designed in that test. Whether it could fail on its own in real operating conditions was a question nobody could answer with total confidence. NASA's official position stopped short of blaming him, but it also stopped short of clearing him completely, and that gap was enough. Within the astronaut corps and the wider aerospace community, a quieter version of the story started circulating, that Grissom had panicked in the water, hit the plunger himself, and then denied it under pressure. It wasn't stated as fact by NASA, it didn't need to be. Rumor travels faster than an official report, and it doesn't require proof. The story hardened years later into something much more public. Tom Wolfe's 1979 book The Right Stuff, and the 1983 film adapted from it, portrayed Grissom in exactly this light, a competent pilot who lost his nerve at the worst possible moment. By the time the movie reached theaters, Grissom had been dead for over 15 years, killed in the Apollo 1 fire on the launch pad in January 1967, along with Ed White and Roger Chaffee. He never had the chance to respond to how a hit film was framing the worst moment of his career. The myth didn't need his cooperation to spread. It just needed an absent man and a good story. What gets lost in that version is what Grissom did with the rest of his career after Liberty Bell 7. NASA didn't sideline him. He went on to command the first crewed Gemini mission in 1965, becoming the first American to fly in space twice. He was assigned command of the first crewed Apollo flight. None of that reads like an agency that privately believed its astronaut had panicked and lied about it. But institutional trust doesn't travel the way pop culture does, and the popular image of Grissom as a man who lost his composure outlasted the professional judgment of the people who actually worked with him. For 38 years, that was where the story sat. A dead astronaut, a persistent rumor, and a spacecraft nobody could examine. The search for Liberty Bell 7 began seriously in 1986, when the Kansas Cosmosphere, building a collection of flown Mercury spacecraft, partnered with an underwater salvage specialist named Kurt Newport. Every other surviving Mercury capsule already had a home in a museum. Liberty Bell 7 was the one flown spacecraft still unaccounted for, and it was sitting at a depth that, at the time, put it well outside what most recovery technology could reach. Newport spent years tracking down ship logs, interviewing people who had been present at the original recovery attempt, and reconstructing splashdown and drift calculations to narrow down a search area on the ocean floor. The project took on Discovery Channel backing and access to deep water search equipment, and in the spring of 1999, a remotely operated vehicle called Magellan, working from the ship Needham Tide, began combing the seafloor along the calculated flight path. On May 1, 1999, after searching through sonar contact after sonar contact, the team got a hit. The ROV's cameras found Liberty Bell 7 resting on the bottom, roughly 350 miles east-southeast of Cape Canaveral, nearly 16,000 feet down. 14 years of work had just paid off. Then the weather turned. Rough seas above the search site put enormous strain on the ROV's tether, and it severed. The vehicle that had just found the most sought-after lost spacecraft in American space history was now itself lost, sitting on the ocean floor somewhere near the capsule it had located. The expedition that year ended without bringing anything up. A second expedition, with a new vehicle, went back out that summer. This time the recovery held. In the early hours of July 20, 1999, the team lifted Liberty Bell 7 off the seafloor and onto the deck of the recovery ship Ocean Project, the 30th anniversary, almost to the day, of the Apollo 11 moon landing. The capsule was carried back to Port Canaveral on July 21, exactly 38 years to the day after Grissom had launched in it. Opening it up produced its own small surprises. Inside, along with pieces of Grissom's flight gear, the team found several Mercury dimes and a handful of $1 bills, small items astronauts sometimes carried as personal keepsakes, waterlogged but intact after nearly 4 decades on the seafloor. For a program built on precision engineering, there was something almost ordinary about finding pocket money still tucked inside a spacecraft that had been to the edge of space and the bottom of the ocean. The physical evidence didn't hand investigators a clean verdict. The explosive bolts and hatch mechanism had spent 38 years in salt water, which limited what forensic conclusions could still be drawn. What examination of the hardware and later reassessments did support was that nothing about the recovered mechanism contradicted Grissom's account. Some researchers who revisited the case afterward, drawing on interviews with engineers who had worked on the hatch's design, pointed to the possibility that static electricity building up in the plunger circuit, rather than a human hand, could have triggered the firing. That explanation remains a plausible theory, rather than a settled fact, but it lines up with what people who worked with Grissom had said for years, that the hatch's design left it more sensitive to accidental triggering than anyone fully appreciated at the time. There's a piece of supporting evidence from inside the program itself that predates the recovery by decades. In October 1962, fellow Mercury astronaut Wally Schirra flew the Sigma 7 mission and made a point of staying inside his capsule until it was safely aboard the recovery ship, refusing to exit early the way Grissom had been forced to. Only once the spacecraft was secured on deck did Schirra deliberately trigger the same type of explosive hatch himself, and it left him with a visible bruise on his hand from the force of it. It was a small, almost stubborn gesture, but the message inside the astronaut core was clear. This hatch could be violent to operate, and Schirra wanted a mark on his own hand as proof that it took real physical effort to fire, the kind of effort a man swimming for his life in the middle of the ocean was unlikely to have applied to himself while denying it minutes later. None of this erased the rumor entirely. Myths built on a popular book and a hit film don't dissolve just because a spacecraft gets pulled out of the ocean. But the recovery gave historians something they hadn't had before: the actual object, available for study, rather than 40 years of second-hand accounts and speculation. Liberty Bell 7 now sits on permanent display at the Cosmosphere in Hutchinson, Kansas, restored and exhibited alongside artifacts from both its flight and its recovery, including Kurt Newport's handwritten expedition log and the equipment his team built to lift it. What the spacecraft's return really changed wasn't a piece of engineering. It gave a dead astronaut's account a second hearing, decades after he was no longer around to give it himself. If you're into stories where the physical evidence finally catches up to a decades-old reputation, subscribe for more of these, and let me know in the comments which lost spacecraft or vehicle you'd want tracked down next. Gus Grissom spent 6 years as an astronaut and 6 more as a myth. The machine that might have settled the argument was there the whole time. It just took 38 years and 3 miles of ocean to bring it back up.